This is the End in Mind presentation. The biggest thing that I took from the video for Bill Daggett is that schools are not failing, okay? But as we progress from each new strategy to each new strategy, our standards are getting lower, but real world expectations are getting higher. So why? How do we fix that? How do we prepare our students to be successful after high school and whatever it is they choose to do? The biggest thing that caught me by surprise was the statistics in students that go to college. And it caught my attention because I am a high school teacher. So at a high school, at graduation or at senior day awards, they always say this many percentage, 90% of all of our students are going on to college. But what's the data and what's the percentage of kids that actually go to college and complete college in the 2 years or the 4 years? And that statistic was surprisingly lower than the kids that just go, because once they get there, they can't make it. They're not set up for success afterwards. So the biggest thing is, how do we educate our students to be successful after high school? So there's 3 things, okay? Create a culture that supports change, a deep needs assessment, what's important to us, and how do we stress those important things, and how are we going to get there? And the third thing is deep professional development. So the first one is creating a culture that supports change. The biggest thing is figuring out what it is that the students need to be successful after high school. So, and then it's a phrase we like to use because we have started a new strategy, learning focused. And it's one thing that he talked about in the video a lot. Every 2 years, there's something new. There's something new that we're supposed to get on board with, and none of the teachers really buy in, so it doesn't work. So the biggest thing is getting buy-in, and we like to call it drinking the Kool-Aid. And being that backbone for whatever it is. Because if you don't get on board with it, the students aren't going to get on board with it. So creating a culture that supports the change. So whatever that change may be, everybody has to buy in. Everybody has to say, this is what we're doing. We're going to do it to the best of our ability. And then the kids will follow suit. The biggest thing is creating a cross-curriculum team. And this is something that we're doing next year at our high school with facilitating teachers. So, and what that means is, instead of having a department, so just math or just science or just social studies, what that does is it creates cross-curriculum teams. So math would meet with, a math teacher would meet with a chemistry teacher, because those are 2 things that go hand in hand. You teach the same students, so how are we going to make this group of students successful across the board? Not just in my class, not just in math. How do we also relate that into a career and technical class? How do we push these students to be successful in everything, not just a star student in one area? What that also does is that eliminates a department chair. I mean, is that a bad thing? To me, though, creating teams, cross-curriculum teams, is going to develop our students further. It creates relationships. They build on teams within the classes they have, therefore giving them a support system, students they learn to work with. Because the biggest thing that I do every day is I have to be able to work with all the people in my school. You have to be able to work with other people, regardless of background, regardless of how they feel or think about anything. You have to be able to communicate and collaborate. And that's something that I think our students these days are failing at. They don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to work together. So how do we get them there? How do we support that? And the biggest thing I think is keeping them maybe together all day, starting a project-based learning across the curriculum. So a project they might work on in math relates to their chemistry class. And that's something where team teaching could come into play. So that way they don't just see it as math class. They see it as learning, developing these problem solving skills that are going to be successful for them after high school. Because, and they ask me this every day, when am I ever going to use this? So it doesn't have to necessarily be about the curriculum, but it's got to be a way in which they are learning skills that prepare them to be successful afterwards. Learning how to communicate, learning how to work together, learning how to problem solve. The next thing is getting parents on board. So teachers have to come first, teachers have to get on board, but then the parents have to get involved. You have to make sure that you're getting that support at home. And at a high school level, that's the biggest challenge. In elementary school, most of the time, I can't necessarily speak from experience, but at that age, most parents are still very involved. By the time they get to high school, you can barely get anybody to pick up the phone or send an email back. So how do we keep students on track and on task even when they leave the school building? And the biggest thing is getting parent buy-in. Just like you have to get teacher buy-in, you have to get parent buy-in. So having town hall meetings where you go to schools that feed into the high school, meeting with parents in those communities. How can we help? How can we support you at home so that the student knows what's expected of them 24 hours a day? And that's something that we started this year. So continuing that into next year, sending out newsletters, making all calls where all parents within our system are called and up to date on things that are happening at the school, things that we're doing, and maybe even offering a parent day where parents can come into the classrooms and see what's going on and see what we're doing. And then that way they can pick up the support at home. The other thing is getting the student buy-in. So that way they understand that what we're doing is preparing them for a life after high school. Basically what it is it has to be one big buy-in. Everybody has to be on board. If one person's not, it's going to completely break down. The next thing is doing a deep needs assessment. So meaning, where are we at with our data? Can our students read? Can our students score well on tests if that's what's important to us? That has become the importance because that's what's pushed from the state. But is being able to take a state test going to really make our kids successful after high school? So the biggest thing is, can a student read? So where are employees saying their employers saying their employees are at as far as being able to read? Can they read? So when they get into the workforce, where is that data? Let's look at that data and then say, okay, where are our students? How do we get them to this percentage so that they are successful when they get to an employer and have to be able to do a job? The biggest issue we see nowadays because of technology is that students rely so much on, the LOL and the BRB, and they don't know how to spell, let alone read or comprehend what something's asking them to do. So the deep needs assessment is mainly asking, where are we? Where do we want to go? And then how do we raise them to a prepared level? The main thing for me is, and this is something he mentioned in the video, we have language arts classes, but do we have reading classes? Are kids taught how to read? And I know that sounds very elementary because I think to myself, I learned how to read when I was 5. But is every kid taught how to read when they're 5? What if a kid falls through the cracks? How do we combat that even at a high school level? Maybe it wouldn't hurt to have a reading class, which, at a small high school, that might be difficult. But if that's what's going to make our kids successful after high school, why is that not something we're doing? So looking at putting in a reading class. The next thing is deep professional development. the main thing with that is teaching teachers how to look at data, what the data is asking. That's easy for a math teacher. We look at numbers all day long. But what about the history teacher or the English teacher? You know, how do we look at data and how do we use the data? So in looking at the needs assessment, we have to be able to understand what that data is saying and then look at our data and meet the two in the middle. So the main thing though is, how do you know that you're really getting thing out of professional development? The main thing for us is using what we learn in professional developments in the classroom. When our administrative team comes in to do walkthroughs, then those things that we discuss and develop in professional development are checked off or looked for when they do the walkthroughs. So the main three things for us, to me, for next year to implement is implementing a reading class, implementing cross-curriculum teams so that students can work across the curriculum on problems or on, you know, how to communicate, how to work in teams, how to get a problem done. And then the other thing is data, looking at that data and using the data successfully and seeing if by the end of the year our scores can meet where the national scores are for employers for whatever it is that's important for them to be successful at any type of job they're going to have. So with those implementations, though, you can monitor the buy-in just based on how teachers are acting in their classrooms. Are they participating in their cross-curriculum teams, collaborating? Are the kids successful in the problem-based learning, or are they successful in being able to communicate? You know, small steps at a time. Looking at the walkthrough data. Are things that are being discussed in professional development being done and being observed when administrators do walkthroughs? And then at the end of the year, whatever it is we choose to focus on, reading mainly, because we have many 9th and 10th graders that are still on a 3rd grade reading level based on their Lexile scores. So the reading plan we can put into place, maybe offering a foundations reading class, or, you know, carving out 30 minutes a day in their English 1 classes to be reading, teaching how to read and comprehend, you know, reading for learning, looking at testing them at the beginning of the year, and then at the end of the year testing them again to see where they're at. So those are the main 3 things that I think we should focus on next year, and that's all stuff that can be scored at the beginning and then scored at the end. So that is the end of our presentation.